Hi folks, and welcome to the latest installment of for what it's Tamworth. For what it's Tamworth. Okay, you see, I've made quite a significant improvement in the professionality of this video log series, in which I drive around Tamworth, which is a country town in New South Wales, Australia, and make commentary, a live commentary, on the ridiculousness of human existence and the crazy things that we do. This particular blog, the last one I did was this morning, so actually two. I'm doing two in a day. Oof. The one I did this morning, I've subsequently named The Flies of Chalet 23. And this one, I haven't quite figured out what the title is, but it's sort of a bit of a rave about earthworms and plastic grass. And particularly what it is, it's about the microplastic contamination of every goddamn square inch of this planet. Okay? So, microplastic contamination is something that most people might have heard about with respect to plastics in the ocean. Let me just address that for a moment. So it's believed that in the order of, I think, is it 8 or 20 million tons? I can't remember. Call it 20, or it might be 8 million tons a year of plastic trash goes into the ocean. And because plastic trash is made of plastic, it doesn't biodegrade in the way that, say, for example, a fish scale might, or a bit of flesh of an organism, or if there's a tree trunk floating in the sea, that would eventually get eaten by something. Well, there are plenty of things that eat plastic bags and stuff floating in the ocean, but just going to do a quick diversion here. That is an amazing aviation contrail. Check that out. It goes, look at that, it even goes behind the lamppost. That is a cracker. That is coming up from the horizon. It is going up and up and up and up and up and up, and then disappears behind that thing. If you're into aviation contrails, mate, that is a good one. Anyway, so part of this inquiry of mine into plastic contamination in the ocean is to understand why is it that the stuff is such bad news from that environmental perspective. Why is it that plastics are so goddamn tough, or undigestible? And so the way that I understand it is this, thinking along the lines of biomimicry, right? So the story goes that in that biomimicry model, what you try to do is to create materials that mimic the way that nature produces materials, and specifically the way that nature. There's a truck, look, with cows on it. I don't know if they're going to the beach on holiday, but anyway, so the way that nature produces materials, it's got these chemical pathways which allow materials to be produced. And when I say materials, I mean fish scales and, you know, cells in the body and this lining of its stomach, all the, you know, the material of trees, the stuff that trees are made of, the stuff that, you know, animals are made of. Okay, and it does that at room temperature using normal atmospheric pressures, and using minerals that are freely available in the immediate environment. That's what nature does. That's how nature makes minerals. We came to producing how nature makes materials. We humans came to producing materials through a scientific and industrial revolution that was powered by coal, and in its early phase there was just a massive abundance of energy. If you want more energy, you just dig up some more coal. And so we started down the path of producing materials without the constraints of, well, with the ability to use what's called exosomatic energy, which is energy that's beyond the actual body of the organism producing the materials. And so what we did was we said, well, because energy is not an option, we can afford to slam together these molecules, which are really high energy molecules. Like a huge amount of energy is required to squeeze these atoms and molecules together to create these complex molecules, which then go on to become the stuff that we take for granted, like terephthalate, PET, help me out here, someone. Anyway, PET, like Coke bottles, right? Polyethylene terephthalate, okay? Complicated molecule. extremely tough to break apart because it was extremely tough to put together in the first place. So we've developed an entire architecture on this planet of creating materials which are extremely energy intensive to create, which means that they're extremely energy intensive to break apart. So when you put it in the ocean, natural processes like the bacterium or whatever, or the stomach acids inside the fish that eat the bag, okay, simply don't have enough oomph to break down those molecules, and so those molecules persist. Now what happens with plastics though is that they do photodegrade, and what that means is that when they're exposed to sunlight, in particular ultraviolet, that helps to break down the molecules. And so what you get is a big piece of plastic laying around in a yard or floating around in the ocean, exposed to sunshine, that breaks down into smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller pieces. Now if that piece of plastic was a crate the size of the back of a truck full of chickens, for example, like you get in Tamworth, then nothing's actually going to even try to put that in its mouth. But the smaller those particles get, the larger number of organisms can accidentally or inadvertently or even deliberately ingest them, thinking, you know, that it's actually edible. And so what happens over time is that these particles of plastic, which can't be digested because the stomach acids in the organisms aren't strong enough to break down those molecular structures, those pieces get smaller and smaller and smaller over time, and as a result they become available to be ingested by smaller and smaller and smaller organisms, to the point now that microplastic contamination, and just to use a definition, microplastics are smaller than 5 millimeters. So microplastics, you might even, some of the really small ones, you might call them nanoplastics, which are like, you know, micron sized or whatever, but they get really small, are now basically showing up in every single ecosystem on the planet. So for example, a guy went down to the bottom of the Marianas Trench recently and found some plastic bags. They did a sample recently of plankton, and they analyzed all the plankton, and all the plankton had microplastic particles inside them. Okay, I was reading an article the other day, something about earthworms, and basically there was a chemical, there was an analysis of the way that earthworms interact with microplastics, and what they're finding is it interrupts their digestion, and basically that if you've got microplastic contamination in your soil, which you have because you're on planet Earth, then you're going to have less earthworms. And earthworms, of course, are important for nutrient cycling and water retention and all the things that they do with that wonderful worm shit. Okay, there was another study recently that said that all the bottled water you could find in Europe had microplastic contamination in it. It said that in every one of the human subjects that were tested, there was microplastics found in their feces and their poo, which means it's come in their body and out the other end. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. And a lot of these little microplastics have a chemical structure that allows them or makes them suited or tending to absorb some really nasty chemicals such as polyaromatic hydrocarbons, dieldrin, and all that nasty dioxin stuff. And so not only are we finding situations where these fish and so forth are eating these things, quite often finding that the particles are blocking their intestinal tract because they're not getting digested, and therefore effectively starving the fish to death, starving it to death with a belly full of plastic, right? It's also contaminating them with these toxins. Anyway, I'm getting to the Tamworth part of the story, but I just got to finish this. I saw a show recently, I can't remember what it's called. If somebody knows the name, if you could stick it in the comments, and it was about the seabirds. I think it was called Albatross. It was about this guy that had traveled around the world following the albatrosses and the plastic that they are scooping up. These birds, they fly around the ocean, and when they see something they want to eat, they scoop it up off the surface, and they don't know what it is. They just scoop it. But in this theater that I went to, this film was put on for free, and there was about 20 people out of a 200-seat theater. That was pretty disheartening how few people cared enough about albatrosses to go and see this film. But there was a piece of footage, I think it was on Midway Island, where this guy went out onto the island, and where there's an albatross hatchery where the albatross lay their eggs in a nest on the ground. And he got really close to these albatross, and when the female, I think it was the male or the female albatross, the parent albatross came back from scooping up these pieces of plastic for dinner, it went back to the nest where the chick was, and the chick opened his neck, opened his beak, and the adult opened his beak. They matched the beaks up, and then basically the adult regurgitated what it had caught that day. And this guy had like this zoomed in camera, and you could see the plastic pieces, this is bottle caps and all sorts of multicolored bits of plastic shit, that the albatross had scooped up from the surface of the sea and was transferring it directly into the mouth of its chick. And I cried. I've been at sea, I've been on fishing boats and oil ships and yachts, and I love seabirds, and that was just too much for me. So anyway, let's bring this back to Tamworth and wrap it up, because I'm going to go into the marsupial park in a minute, see if there's any marsupials left in Tamworth. And I'm going to do it now, but I'm going to post a photograph that I took a few minutes ago of this. I've been to this cafe. I had fruit loaf and a coffee. It's very nice. I sat there for a couple of hours researching how you assess the technical performance of solar PV modules. Very interesting. I can do a rave on that. But anyway, as I left, there was like this little parkland area, and it's beautiful. I mean, it's really aesthetically very nice. And I looked down at the grass, and there's half a hectare of fucking grass, and I touched it. It's fucking plastic grass. It's fucking plastic grass. I mean, I know the place is in drought, so you can see the logic, but what's going to happen? It's going to sit there in the sun. The ultraviolet radiation is going to fall down on the plastic grass. It's outside, right? It's not inside. It's not undercover. And those microplastic particles are going to fall off. It's going to go into the waterways. It's going to go into the fish. It's going to go into the worms. It's fucking everywhere. We've fucked this planet, right? Technically, we've fucked it. I'm an environmental scientist. I drilled down into this shit. Every square inch of this fucking planet has been contaminated by human civilization. To quote a recently coined expression, this culture is finished. The question is whether we can raise a new one fast enough before it all goes down, because we're heading for a rerun of the Permian extinction. You can fucking smell it. You can smell it. Anyway, more more for what it's Tamworth soon.